Torrential rains flood parts of China, millions impacted. Thousands are displaced as water levels exceed warning levels. An inside source tells us a detention center has been emptied out in preparation for Hong Kong protesters. It's in anticipation of Beijing's new national security law being passed. A new analysis suggests the Chinese regime has launched a propaganda campaign on Twitter, as thousands of suspicious accounts have cropped up. Popular video conferencing platform Zoom shuts down a U.S. rights activist's account after an online meeting commemorating the Tiananmen crackdown. And two senators proposed nearly $23 billion in incentives for overseas chipmakers to set up shop in the U.S. That's amid Washington's tech rivalry with Beijing and telecom giant Huawei. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Heavy rains have been drenching southern China for more than a week. Around 3 million people from 8 provinces have been affected. Nearly 230,000 of them have been evacuated. The water levels of about 150 rivers have also reached or exceeded local warning levels. At least 9 people have died and 5 are missing. One house built on a now waterlogged riverbank in Guangxi province even collapsed on Wednesday after its foundation gave way and slid into the river. In some areas, streets have turned into fast-flowing rivers. Many cars are almost completely submerged. The entrance of one shopping center is now impossible to access. The floodwaters also left behind huge amounts of muddy water. In one neighborhood, mud completely covers the ground. Some houses have been destroyed, while landslides also damaged crops. Chen Hong, a business owner in Guangxi province, told us her city has been underwater for almost 1 week. We gave her a pseudonym and changed her voice to protect her identity, as Chinese people aren't allowed to be interviewed from overseas media without permission from authorities.
This year is particularly bad because of the heavy rain. Lots of heavy rain pouring down on us. Water was coming down from the mountains. Everywhere in the country has been flooded. Everywhere is soaked.
Ms. Chen explained that a small dam in her county collapsed. A Chinese netizen also reminded people online to be especially careful of small dams built within the last 20 years. He said these dams were poorly constructed and often leak small amounts of water normally, but added that during a flood, these dams will collapse. One video shows residents who live close to one such dam leaving their homes out of fear that it could crumble. Chinese state-run media outlets have only released a handful of reports on the disaster. In recent days, the front page of the People's Daily, China's largest newspaper, didn't feature a single report on the flooding. Instead, readers only see positive reports that praise the Communist Party or details on what party leaders are doing. Online, China's Twitter equivalent, Weibo, also hardly featured the news. Out of the platform's top 50 search terms, only one is about the floods. Meanwhile, 5 of them condemn or criticize U.S. actions or events, like the recent protests sweeping the country. One Twitter user questioned why Chinese media continue to praise the so-called good life there, but don't show people who lost their homes and have been washed away by the flooding. According to weather forecasts, central, northern, and northeastern China will experience showers and heavy thunderstorms in the coming days. Some areas may even face gale-force winds. According to one Taiwanese media outlet, a typhoon is expected to enter mainland China from Hong Kong in 3 days. Elsewhere in northeastern China, locusts have emerged. Despite theories that they may have come from elsewhere, they were found to have originated in the area. Heilongjiang and Jilin provinces issued urgent warnings about combating the insects. At least 4,100 acres have been hit. According to local media, 1 to 2 locusts can be seen per square foot on average. In the worst cases, 5 were found per square foot. A video shows locusts were also found in a province in central China, but there is no report from local media to confirm it. At the same time, the CCP virus epidemic in these 2 provinces has also worsened recently. Northeast China produces about 1/5 of all of China's rice supplies every year. Now to Hong Kong. An inside source from China told us that a detention center in Shenzhen City has been cleared out in order to make room for detained Hong Kongers in the future. The facility is over 40 miles away from Hong Kong. We also called the detention center to confirm the clearance. Beijing's so-called national security law on Hong Kong has prompted concerns about the future of the city's autonomy and its freedom. Protests are expected to erupt when it takes effect in the coming months. Hong Kong police are already setting up a special unit to enforce the new law. And in Taiwan, the Taiwanese Air Force say drove off several Chinese Su-30 fighters on Tuesday after they briefly entered Taiwan's air defense identification zone. China has been conducting military exercises southwest of Taiwan. Beijing has threatened to use military force if Taiwan declares independence. That's because China claims democratic Taiwan as its sovereign territory. Australia is adopting a harder stance towards the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP. On Wednesday, the party claimed Australia was being racist against Chinese students. But a day later, Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison called China's claims rubbish, saying Australians will never trade their values in response to coercion from the CCP. This is the first time Morrison has used the word coercion to describe the trade dispute with China. That's after Australia tightened its rules for foreign investment a week ago to bolster national security. Some Chinese companies will be impacted. The European Union plans to investigate TikTok, a controversial but popular social media app, over its privacy policies and operation in Europe. TikTok is owned by China-based company ByteDance, which is currently undergoing a U.S. national security review. Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister François-Philippe Champagne has reportedly borrowed heavily from the Bank of China in London, where he has 2 registered home mortgages. His opposition says it puts him in a vulnerable position with the Chinese regime, especially amid escalating tensions between the two nations. Canadian newspaper The Globe and Mail reported that Champagne bought 2 apartments in London in 2009 and 2013. At the time, he was working as an executive at a UK multinational construction and engineering firm. The current balance for the mortgages stands at over $1 million. Conservative Member of Parliament Garnet Genius called the mortgages very dangerous and says it could present a conflict of interest for the Foreign Affairs Minister. But Champagne defended his position. He said at the time he wasn't able to borrow from London banks, but added that he's always been transparent about the loans. He's also noted that so far there haven't been any issues. Twitter is banned in China, but the platform still sees a lot of pro-Beijing posts. An analysis by the New York Times suggests the Chinese regime has launched a propaganda campaign on the platform. The study found that in the recent weeks, over 4,500 accounts reposted a high volume of tweets from Chinese officials or Chinese state-run media. These accounts are relatively new and were created within the last 3 months. The analysis also found that some of the accounts were created around the same time tensions rose between the Chinese regime and the Trump administration. 1/3 of the accounts were similarly created within the last 3 months, and 1 in 7 of them has 0 followers. It wouldn't be the first time the Chinese regime launched a propaganda effort on the platform. Last year, Twitter suspended over 200,000 accounts, citing large-scale misinformation from the regime. These accounts were aimed at discrediting Hong Kong pro-democracy protesters. The video conferencing company Zoom has come under fire. A human rights group's account was shut down after an online event that commemorated the Tiananmen Square massacre. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
Video conferencing giant Zoom shut down the account of one human rights activist group after they held an online event commemorating China's Tiananmen Square crackdown. It touched Chinese authorities' nerves.
Many speakers are based in China. Most of them were arrested or put under control during the meeting. Chen Yunfei was the only person that was able to attend the online event. He was arrested right after.
Chen Yunfei is a human rights activist based in China, where the Tiananmen Square crackdown remains a taboo topic. On June 4, 1989, Chinese troops moved into Tiananmen Square, firing rounds at unarmed protesters who were asking for democracy. Zhou said they chose to use Zoom because the software is not censored in China, and it enabled a Chinese audience to commemorate the crackdown without having to cross China's censorship system. A week after the event, Zhou found the group's account was closed.
We contacted Zoom immediately through all kinds of means, email, phone calls. We contacted the company continuously. We heard nothing from them. And so we had to resort to the media. And later on, many journalists called Zoom.
He said Zoom reinstated the account after news organization Axios reported it on Wednesday.
We never heard from Zoom.
He read the company's response in media reports. It said when a meeting is held across different countries, the participants within those countries are required to comply with their respective local laws.
Their reason is apparently not right. Even if China has its own law, our account is US-based. Our account should not have been shut down.
Other Zoom accounts were shut down as well. They belonged to a pro-democracy Hong Kong activist and a student leader during the Tiananmen Square crackdown. U.S. Senator Josh Hawley wrote a letter to Zoom asking the company to pick a side, American principles and free speech, or short-term global profits and censorship. Reporting by Juliet Song, NTD News.
Pig farms are being built in major Chinese cities, including Beijing. It's the communist regime's attempt to address the country's food crisis. Farmers are scrambling to construct new farms and breed millions of pigs.
200 million pigs in 2 years. That's China's aggressive new plan to tackle their food crisis, an extreme shortage of pigs and skyrocketing pork prices. The communist regime is ordering every province and major city to increase its pork production. In the outskirts of Beijing, construction has started on the first 11 large pig farms.
This year, our task is to complete the supply of about 5,000 to 6,000 pigs. And next year, we're going to produce at full capacity, around 60,000 pigs a year.
China lost half of its pig stock from the African swine fever back in 2018. The Chinese regime is now under pressure to restock and stabilize prices.
It's mainly to solve the problem of the soaring pork prices. To some extent, the country's economy and people's livelihoods are at stake.
Under the new plan, Beijing needs to produce close to 900,000 pigs annually. That's about 3 times what it raised last year. Pork isn't the only food crisis in China. Grain shortages caused the price of corn to hit a 5-year high earlier this year.
And now turning to Chinese tech companies. A bipartisan group of lawmakers is proposing a new bill to cut off the giants from their chip suppliers by inviting them to break ground in the U.S. instead.
A new bipartisan bill has been introduced in the Senate, aiming to incentivize chipmakers to set up shop in the United States. If passed, it would offer almost $23 billion in aid for semiconductor manufacturers who start producing in the U.S. Chip factories can cost up to $15 billion to build, mainly due to the pricey tools required for manufacturing. The proposal would create a 40% refundable income tax credit for semiconductor equipment, $10 billion in federal funds to match state incentives to build factories, and $12 billion in research and development funding. While some firms like Intel Corp and Micron Technology still make chips in the US, the majority are made in Asia. TAIWAN Semiconductor Manufacturing, or TSMC, has more than half of the global markets. iPhone maker Apple Inc., Qualcomm Inc., and Nvidia Corp all rely on TSMC for their chips. The move comes amid a strategic U.S. technology standoff with China and its telecom giant Huawei, which is considered a threat to U.S. national security. Senators John Cornyn and Mark Warner introduced the bill on Wednesday. Aides to Congressman Michael McCaul and Doris Matsui said the two plan to introduce a version in the House on Thursday.
And while we have seen many businesses closing down around the country due to the economic fallout from the virus, some Catholic schools have been affected too.
Catholic schools around the country have faced tough times for years, and it looks like the situation isn't going to improve anytime soon. Quigley Catholic High School in Pennsylvania is one among many that have recently announced that they won't reopen this fall. The closure is sparking anger and heartbreak in scores of affected communities, It's especially hard when they first get the news.
I just broke down. I couldn't, it was just really hard.
The school served the Pittsburgh suburbs of Beaver County since 1967. Usually about 440 kids enroll, but this year the projected number fell below 100. It's not just the pandemic that caused it, but it did compound their troubles.
If we could be funded, then we would be able to move on. And I think that's where the COVID came in, that they weren't able to do a lot of the fundraisers that they had planned on doing.
Both women have worked at Quigley for about 35 years.
It's been so good. That's why I'm here. Sister too, We absolutely love our job here.
Burke Miller, who met her husband when they both were students at Quigley, said the closure is going to leave an empty spot in all of their hearts. According to the National Catholic Educational Association, at least 100 schools have announced that they won't reopen this fall.
New York's MTA is going strong with its efforts in keeping its system free from the virus as passengers start to get back on board. But now it's facing some concern over its finances.
With the virus making its final rounds in the U.S., New York City is working to get its renowned transit system back up and running. The MTA has recently reinstated full subway service, making more frequent runs and allowing passengers to once again take express trains. But the agency says it's making sure to protect its customers from any remnants of the virus.
Our priority right now is to do things that will help folks be safe and feel safe as they come back to the system in the next few months.
Since the pandemic hit New York, the MTA has been disinfecting its vehicles regularly and urging passengers to wear face masks. Along with these measures is confidence that New York City can run on complete mass transit as it recovers.
If we observe mass vigilance and other kinds of precautions in the public spaces, I think that we have a good shot at demonstrating that we can operate safely on mass transit and otherwise.
But the agency is still uncertain whether or not its relief fund will keep them afloat. The almost $4 billion fund is estimated to run out by August, something the MTA says will cause a huge setback to its expansion program and infrastructure projects.
The problem is, I can't advance new ADA stations. I can't advance new resignaling projects with the certainty they could be funded over the long run. And that's the holdup that we're struggling with.
But pre-existing projects were able to make progress during the pandemic and are still underway.
Here at China in Focus, we dedicate ourselves to bringing you truthful, unbiased reporting. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the latest updates, and see you tomorrow.